This public hearing conducted by the Committee on Appropriations and Adjudication will now come to order. Notice the public hearing was disseminated to all local media outlets via electronic format on Tuesday, April 25th, 2017, with a second notice provided on Monday, May the 1st, 2017. Notice of the hearing was also made known on the Guam Legislature's website. We have two bills on the agenda today. No, this morning we only have one bill, and that bill was introduced by Senator Dennis Rodriguez, and so I'll allow him to explain his bill, and we'll hear testimony.
Alfadine, good morning. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Bill 43-34 is relative to authorizing the Guam Veterans Affairs Office to outsource the maintenance and upkeep of the Guam Veterans Cemetery. Over the years, Mr. Speaker, we've heard and we've known of the challenges faced by the Veterans Affairs Office in upkeeping and maintaining our Veterans Cemetery. And really, when you hear a lot of times we talk about having to respect our veterans and continue to thank them for the service that they have provided to our community. And in the cemetery, the final resting place, this is where we really ought to ensure that we extend our utmost respect and demonstrate the value that we know that our veterans have provided to our island and our nation. And so when we sat down and spoke with the Veterans Affairs Office and really got down to the root of the problem and what needs to be done, we know that ensuring proper staff that know how to run a cemetery are there is something that was lacking, the support in getting the personnel there. And so, and also one thing that we've discovered is that there was no guidelines, no standard operating procedures on guiding what it's going to take to ensure that we upkeep the cemetery. And so this bill, Mr. Speaker, mandates that the Veterans Affairs Office, in consultation with the Guam Veterans Commission, that they put together, number one, an SOP, standard operating procedure, on how we need to ensure the cemetery is upkept. This bill also, Mr. Speaker, allows and authorizes the Guam Veterans Affairs Office to outsource the upkeep of the Veterans Cemetery. If it's desired that perhaps contracting a third party, someone that knows how to operate and upkeep a cemetery, is available and willing to take on the services, and that's something they may pursue. As a condition, one of the preference that we're ensuring in this bill is that this company or this firm, this third party, be a service-disabled veteran-owned small business. In that case, Mr. Speaker, we're able to ensure that truly what we say here today and what the intent is of ensuring that we value and respect our veterans is kept intact there with this third party being a veteran-owned small business organization. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Rodriguez. I want to also note the presence of our Legislative Secretary, Senator Regine Biscoe-Lee, who has joined us this morning. We have five individuals who have signed up to provide testimony. Mr. Mendiola, Mr. Devlin, you coming up? Are you guys testifying or just support? Mr. San Augustine, Mr. Cundiff, and Mr. Cruz. I'd like to acknowledge the Senator San Augustine who's joined us. Inasmuch as you were the first to sign up, Mr. Mendiola, if you would start off.
Good morning, Senators. Mr. Speaker, Senator Rodriguez and Senator Lee, Senator San Augustine, good morning. in reference to Bill number 4334, an act to outsource the maintenance and upkeep of the Guam Veterans Cemetery. Again, I want to say good morning to all of you. My name is Daniel T. Mendiola, President of Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 668, Guam, and also I am the current Chairman of the Guam Veterans Commission. I am in favor of this bill. The poor state of the Guam Veterans Cemetery did not happen overnight. Since my retirement from the Army in 1985, I have been involved with veterans organizations, and have held various positions within. My past has afforded me the opportunity to come forward to convince everyone that outsourcing of the Guam Veterans Cemetery is one of the options to take towards improving the services and maintenance of this sacred ground, laid aside to honor the men and women who had given their lives to ensure the freedom of all. For those who have passed and those that are being buried today, it would be too late for them to yearn for a better place to be buried because they died with a and taste of a torn and worn down cemetery, and that is the Guam Veterans Cemetery. In the past, administrators and directors of this agency have tried to implement a program to address this situation, but were not successful in their endeavors. Instead, they ended up doing quick fix-it and other type of shoddy repairs, which leads to nowhere sustainable in standards. I believe that the major factor contributing to the downfall of this cemetery is due to the lack of funding and or appropriations necessary so that we can hire experienced laborers and or top-notch administrators. Another problem is within the hiring process. We can't continue to hire people the way it's being done. The HAYU process does not work. We must stop abusing the hiring laws. And if we are going to hire people to do the job, we need to make sure that we run them through the process. I have yet to see a process of hiring an administrator run through the commission, which is supposed to, from a list from the Department of Administration, so that we can partake in selecting who will be the best candidate. And that has never happened. So in any case, even if we outsource some of the services, we are still going to be bound, and the responsibility will still be with the DAO administrator. So let's, I believe in continuing to try to do the best job we can, and let's stick to the hiring process. It's not that this doesn't really apply to the current administrator. I've been working side by side with him on here, and he's been trying hard to fix everything that has gone wrong. And maybe one day we'll have, the standards will be up to date in the cemetery. In closing, we have to unite and change the image of our veteran cemetery. We will one day join the fallen, and maybe by then we will witness the beginning of a new dawn in history of the Guam Veterans Cemetery. Let's approve this bill. It's the right thing to do for our veterans. Half a day, and thank you, Senators. Let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mendiola. Mr. Devlin, did you wish to testify?
My name is Tom Devlin. I'm one of the commanders of the military of the Purple Heart. The Purple Heart organization had a meeting about 2 months ago with respect to what was going on in the cemetery, the pictures that were taken, what was going on when the news media went down there. We've been going back and forth for this cemetery for years. Some of the same faces I've seen before, some are new faces sitting in front of me. The members of the military of the Purple Heart are tired of speaking, and seems that no one seems to be listening until it seems to be near Memorial Day or Veterans Day. And then all of a sudden, everybody's concerned. That's how they feel. Whether that's accurate or not, they feel, and they basically told me they're going to vote on how they feel. And what they feel right now is not very positive. Now, I agree with what Dan has said. But also, when you look at the cemetery, there are other issues. Contract. What do you mean by a contract for maintenance? The way I see it is, are we thinking about or trying to think about privatizing the cemetery? Getting some type of company in that handles cemeteries. More likely than not, maybe veteran cemeteries. And if you do privatize, do you have the money to do that? Do you have the funds to do that? Now, you look at the bill, the funds are going to be taken out of the budget, the local Guam Veterans Affairs budget. The Guam Veterans Affairs budget doesn't get what they need on a yearly basis. How can I say that? Just look at the cemetery. Just look at the office. Now, as we're sitting here, we're talking about a cemetery. From what I understand, that office has to be vacated by October. So there's more money they're going to have to pay for rent. So where does that money come from? So it sounds great. It makes the veterans feel better. But the details, what are the details? Is the Veterans Commission going to be giving the yay or nay? The Veterans Commission today is only an advisory group. They don't say yay or nay or any financial matters at all. They don't have any input whether yes or no as to whether who's the administrator, who the administrator hires. So maybe there could be a legal issue that we have to look at. I'm not an attorney, but the Governor of Guam has to look at that law that originally covers the Veterans Affairs Office and cemetery. Also, as I'm speaking, the Veterans Affairs Office is responsible for 2 cemeteries, not 1. They're responsible for the cemetery next to Autospot. They probably don't want to do it because they inherited that task. But the Navy handles that. But if the Navy pulls out tomorrow, the current administrator has to send a crew down. If you contract out, what happens to the employees? Have you ever been to the maintenance shop at the Veterans Cemetery? I wouldn't put a POW in that shop. But yet, employees that are working there now have to work under those conditions. Now, I was down at the cemetery about 3 weeks ago, and they have a small office near the chapel, right across from the chapel. They had riding mowers in the office. Not many people want to go to a cemetery, any cemetery. We're going to get there eventually, but we don't like to really visit it. But this is a cemetery that 15 senators and a governor, lieutenant governor are held accountable for. So I hope you make the right decision, but I would warn everybody, the veterans community and those that are not veterans but have veterans in their family are going to be looking at political leaders as to what they do, where the money is coming from, and if the money is actually available. And in conclusion, I went to the Guam Legislative website where it says commissions and boards, page 109. It says Veterans Cemetery Task Force, appointments pending. This was printed up this morning, page 109, dated 7/18/12. So if we're supposed to have a Veterans Cemetery Task Force, my question to all 15 senators is, where is it? And why is this page blank? That's my question as a leader of a veterans organization. This is your website, it's not mine. This is the Veterans Cemetery Task Force on this page, and it's blank. And my organization would like an answer from someone who's a senator today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Devlin. We'll look into that last matter. Mr. Snodestein.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, Honorable Senators, good morning. My name is Joe A. San Augustine. I am the Special Assistant to the Governor, Administrator for the Guam Veterans Affairs Office. This morning I am submitting a testimony in support of Bill 4334. But before I read the bill, I want to just freely share with you all some information up front. With all fairness to the Guam Veterans Affairs Office and the Guam Veterans Cemetery and the Naval Cemetery, The Guam Veterans Affairs Office has never been really appropriately manned or given enough cemetery workers to address many of the issues that we are seeing down at the cemetery in the past and up till now. 2005, when the Veterans Affairs were severed from the Parks and Recs, which was for the longest time, the Parks and Recreations has been the one that was administering it with the help of Public Works, the burials and the maintenance of the cemeteries. And since 2005, they were never hiring people permanently under the Guam Veterans Affairs Office to address the situation that we see at hand. That is being addressed, and it's being addressed since I've first taken over as the administrator back in July of 2016. The old saying of, it doesn't happen overnight, I would love to make it happen overnight, but I'll tell you what, it becomes impossible when you rush a job and then neglect to do it right. It's going to take some time, and I will assure you as an administrator that with my mindset, everything that I do in relation to being the administrator for the Guam Veterans Affairs Office and the two cemeteries that are mentioned is moving forward and improving the service and the quality of service and the process that those services are being provided. A lot of work has been done in the past, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done moving forward. If they had never had hired people to work at the cemetery, there is no way that you could get the work done that is expected by the veterans and of this government. So in saying that, I'm going to set that aside because that's done and over with, and just share with you all that I am moving forward in ensuring that I hire enough people to address the situation down at the cemetery. And it is happening. The maintenance shop that's been mentioned, it's old, it's obsolete. We're making do because that's all there is. I just came back from a conference, a director's conference in D.C. back in March, and it was brought to my attention that we need a new maintenance shop because that shop is not going to do it. So I am working collaboratively with the VA to move forward and identify another area where we could build a shop or another process to ensure that we continue operations while we're having a new maintenance shop being built. But with that said, there's a lot of good progress that is happening down at the cemetery, that's happening with the Guam Veterans Affairs, and there's no back movement but all forward movement. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, Senators, my name is Joe A. San Augustine. I am the Special Assistant to the Governor, Guam Veterans Affairs Office Administrator. I have read the proposed Bill 4334, introduced by Senator Dennis Rodriguez, Senator Joe S. San Augustine, and Senator Frank B. Uggan. An act to add a new subsection 67103.2 to Chapter 67 of Division 3, Title 10 Guam Code Annotated, relative to authorizing the Guam Veterans Affairs Office to outsource the maintenance and upkeep of the Guam Veterans Cemetery, and if I may add, the old Naval Cemetery that's located in Hagåtña. The Guam Veterans Cemetery is a state-recognized cemetery and must adhere to the National Cemetery Administration standards for operation and maintenance of cemeteries. As we all know, it is a final resting place for those who have served and sacrificed for the freedom of this great country. Those that remain behind, which is us, which is myself, have been entrusted to ensure the highest standards of services are rendered. The upkeep and immaculate appearance of such a sacred ground should always be a priority. The Guam Veterans Affairs Office, along with the Guam Veterans Commission and the Veteran Service Organizations, have been working diligently and will continue to work together to address these concerns. Pursuant to this bill, the Guam Veterans Affairs Office and the Veterans Commission will utilize the Veterans Administration and National Cemetery Regulation standards to develop a standard operating procedure in the event that the services are outsourced and that the vendor has a procedure to follow and comply with the national standards. While I do recognize this bill as an avenue of resources, I request that Section 2 of this bill, Paragraph C, the Guam Veterans Affairs Office may contract the maintenance and upkeep of the Veterans Cemetery with the concurrence of the Veterans Commission, that the language may remain as is so that it provides flexibility to the administrator and the commission to outsource whatever services we deem feasible to outsource and not make it a mandatory. I concur with Section 2, Paragraph D, that the contract shall be written for a preference of a disabled veteran owned of a small business. I also acknowledge Section 2, Paragraph E, for the contractual outsource for the maintenance, that the funding be allocated from the fiscal year budget of the Guam Veterans Affairs Cemetery, coming from the Guam Veterans Affairs Office. I bring this to your attention, Senators, if need to, that it becomes an additional funding requirement. Right now, I do not see that as needed, but if need to, that I ask and seek for your support that this legislative body be able to infuse additional funding to the Guam Veterans Affairs Office to support this bill so that we could honor those that have served. With that said, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, I fully support this bill. I thank you for your initiative. I thank you for your compassion. I thank you for caring for our veterans, those that serve, and their family. At this time, I am open for questions. Cesar Masi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Snodestein. Mr. Condon, did you have testimony? Please, be recognized.
Good morning. My name is Bill Cundiff. I'm chairman of the Air Force Association and also the vice chairman of the Guam Veterans Commission. I support this bill. I got a couple recommended changes on subsection 671.03.2, outsource maintenance and upkeep of Guam Veterans Cemetery. Since our maintenance folks are not going to go away after perhaps we outsource some of the things that needs to be done down there, I recommend to right after outsource to augment maintenance and upkeep of the Veterans Cemetery, to augment all the things that needs to be done, because those folks are not going to go away. Also, on line 20, funding of the contractual outsourcing for maintenance and upkeep of the Guam Veterans Cemetery shall annually be allocated from the fiscal budget of the Guam Veterans Cemetery of the Guam Veterans Affairs. We don't have any money for that. There is money coming in for every burial, every veteran's burial. I think that money is about $700 per, something like that, per veteran. So we use those funds for the upkeep of the cemetery and to buy supplies, equipment, and so on. We pump in, if you read my article last 2 months, we pump in millions and millions of dollars here. We pump in the last 10 years, over $500 million into this economy from our benefits. That's not including retirement, that's not including Social Security and other benefits our spouses get. So why can't this sector, this community sector, the veteran sector, be supported by giving them additional funds to ensure the Veterans Affairs Office runs smoothly? It's actually a shame to treat our veterans this way. I don't understand. I really don't understand why it's this way. There are so many services down there, or so many services that can be done if we have the proper manpower. But we don't have the manpower. So I'm asking you to look into whatever resources you have to give the Veterans Cemetery at least another $100,000, $200,000 budget, at least for the outsourcing of the maintenance area. It is very important that we do that. It is very embarrassing sometimes when you go down there and look at all the crypts. The crypts are very dirty. And the maintenance guys down there can't do it all. They need additional funding. So please find a way to give additional funding to the cemetery. One recommended way is to add perhaps to the streetlight fund or some other fund and have the people pay additional $5 tax perhaps and give the money collected to the Veterans Affairs Office. That could be a funding source that you don't have to take out of your budget. So thank you and appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cundiff, and thank you for that recommendation. Mr. Cruz.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, Chairman, Honorable Senators. I'm here to represent our organization, the Iraq, Afghanistan, and Persian Gulf Veterans of the Pacific. And before I go further in reading the organization's testimony, I would first like to say that I am not very happy that only such a few senators that we have elected have taken the opportunity to sit today and to listen to our concerns and our testimony. It is very upsetting and it's sad that even our senators who are veterans amongst themselves are not here today to give us the respect and the opportunity to testify to them and let them hear our concerns. It is not every day that we have a bill or a public hearing in regarding veterans' issues and concerns. And for that, not giving the opportunity to listen to us is much disrespect to the veteran all in all. My name is Rodney Cruz, Jr. I am the founder and president of the Iraq, Afghanistan, and Persian Gulf Veterans of the Pacific. I'm here today on Bill 4334 on the opposition amendment to add subsection 67-103.2 to Chapter 67 on the authorizing the Guam Veterans Affairs Office to outsource maintenance and upkeep of the Guam Veterans Cemetery. I would have to say to you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, and honorable senators, that this testimony comes directly from the veterans of this organization, and that I must stand and support my members and these veterans of this young generations as they have spoken here. There, Mr. Speaker, Chairman, honorable senators, I would like to state that the Iraq, Afghanistan, and Persian Gulf Veterans of the Pacific do not completely oppose Bill 4334, and that we understand the intent of the bill is to relieve the Guam Veterans Affairs Office. The amendment of Bill 4334, however, is purely a backdoor attempt to alleviate the responsibility of failures and lack of management from the GVAO. The citizens, and most especially our veterans, deserve to know the truth of what is going on with the agencies responsible to effectively manage the Veterans Cemetery. with the presentation of this bill lacks a concern that has been an ongoing and absolute disrespect to the veterans who call Guam home. The issue this legislature must address before handing out money that should be spent towards the needs and resources for the veterans as intended is the frequent systematic failures and evidently mismanaged by those who are paid high salaries to do so. A handoff at a high price is irrelevant if we continue to place insufficient and incapable leaders in the position to manage the GVAO, let alone the cemetery. Questions arise that concern the veterans community, most importantly the Iraq, Afghanistan, and Persian Gulf veterans, the youngest generation of veterans on Guam. Number one, will the administrator and staff be paid the same salary but with less responsibility? Number two, what really is the shortcoming or shortfalls of the agency? Number three, what is the budgeted cost that will be added to the already insufficient agency? Number four, how specifically will the additional funds be allocated? Number five, what offsets will be neglected to fund a contract of this size and nature? I encourage you strongly to oppose the amendment of the above bill for the following reasons. Section 1, line 2 states that the legislature finds GVAO struggles to consistently maintain and upkeep the maintenance of the GVAO Veterans Cemetery. If the legislature is concerned about the GVAO, why haven't they changed the law to make the GVAO an independent agency, provided more classified positions to staffing, provide the budget to fully operate without being shortchanged for operation? Or why not call a public hearing to oversight into looking into the programs and operation of the GVO or the Veterans Cemetery to justify or provide a study, perhaps, in request of the need? In line 9, it states the legislature finds that the appearance of the cemetery is high priority to our veterans and general community, and rightly so, as we value and respect our service members. Appearance has nothing to do with the respect of the sacrifice of our deceased veterans. It's about providing honor and respect given to the burial of our heroes. Section 2, line 14, the word maintenance and upkeep is general and open-ended. Page 2, line 2, subsection A. GVO persistent to this chapter shall within 60 days develop an SOP to follow for the upkeep and maintenance of the Guam Veterans Cemetery. The Commission meets once a month to convene on the matters that are the veterans community concerns and issues on Guam. 60 days is not a reasonable and adequate time to submit a thorough SOP for the maintenance and upkeep of the cemetery. More importantly, why is there one not in place, as GVO must comply with the Department of Veterans Affairs regulation as indicated in lines 10 through 14, since it has been established and considered a Veterans Affairs official cemetery. Line 15, subsection C, GVO may contract the maintenance and upkeep with concurrence of the Veteran Commission. What is the current status of the cemetery funds? Where are the financial reports that were supposed to be submitted? Why haven't the reports have been uploaded and posted for public viewing on the website? What is the operation cost breakdown? GVO recently given an audit September 2016 that concluded an F rating at the high risk of the public auditor herself. Line 18, subsection D, preference set aside to service disabled veteran-owned small business. How many disabled veteran-owned small business are on Guam? What is the underlying intent of only disabled-owned veteran small business? Why is the legislature not affording female veteran-owned business or veterans who serve honorably, who are not disabled, who will handle the RFP? And then question, who will handle the RFP process? Line 20, subsection E, finding the contractual outsourcing. What has been the operation budget for the cemetery inclusive of the cemetery funds? We have no history to justify operation costs other than the facts, monies, resources, invoices, receipts, to name a few, keep coming up missing, and no one cares to find out or hold the leaders or the fund accountable. How can you allocate from the fiscal year budget when this government is already over budget? A proven fact, the GVO and the veterans are not considered high priority when allocating funds. The amended portion of the bill represents the true colors and dubious nature that the GVO and the politicians really hold. I would like to ask you senators to seek such opinion from the legislative counselor or attorney and the OPA Doris Flores Brooks in their assessment or opinion to these matters in regards to Bill 43-34 in moving forward. The veterans who have paid their dues to this island and the nation shouldn't have to stand for this type of political game playing, most especially before Memorial Day, as it has been in the last 5 years, or at least. And is that the maintenance and upkeep is really the issue here? What about veterans who are not getting the proper burial honors? It is sad to know that a fellow veteran, a son of a Vietnam veteran, Mr. Meno, who was buried last November, had no burial honors that was present, and that the two sons had to fold the flag to present it to their family. No one in their respectful mind shall approve the tactics being used to ignore the underlying failures and mismanagement of an agency that is solely organized to, I quote, care for him who shall borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan by serving and honoring the men and women who are veterans. As elected officials, I hope you in turn will honor your responsibility to protect us all from this type of posturing political. Anything less will be considered indecent and immoral. We look to you, senators, not only moving forward, but we must also assess the past history documented by this government agency in regards to its management and operation. We cannot ignore those facts. Those facts. As yes, privatizing, outsourcing may be an option, but I have to ask you to ask ourselves, have we done everything possible to ensure that we met our part as veteran organization, as veteran leaders, as the government, before we go to the last option on the table? We all want our cemetery to be immaculate, beautiful, shining. But what comes with all that comes with sacrifice. And day after day after day, we read in the newspaper, more veterans die because of their health associated with a service-connected injury or illness from their service in the military. It is sad that we still have families coming forward and saying that they are unable to recognize where their family member is buried because overgrown grass, or somebody couldn't coordinate Department of Defense to be there to fold the flag. We understand that there's a lot of issues and concerns when it comes to this agency. But we must pause, we must look at the bigger picture, and before presenting a bill to the community and to the veterans of Guam, we must at least do our homework. And by providing whatever means a study to see what could work for that agency in regards to what their actual budget is? 600 some thousand plus or minus enough for operation? Or is $1 million would satisfy the total cost? If other small agencies smaller than the Veterans Affairs Office can operate at $1 million, why can't this agency do so? This agency's been through a lot, and it's been very emotional for many of us who lost and have to bury our significant other, our father, our brother, our sister, or our family member. This has nothing to do with Mr. San Augustino's position currently here at the GVO. He has done a great job, and we recognize that. But there are a lot of questions that we, the Iraq, Afghanistan, and Persian Gulf veterans, have, and there's a lot of questions that are not answered. And we hope that just because we're veterans, we don't only get special treatment, but we're also being held accountable into our actions and our responsibilities as well. Lastly, I hope to see an apology from all the senators who are not here present, most especially for those who are veterans who could not make it today. Because this is an important matter. As you may see, not all of us may agree to or disagree on the same matters. But it is an important matter to every one of us, no matter what era, no matter what branch of service, no matter male, female, or what uniform you put on. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, Honorable Senators, Senator Lee, Senator San Augustine, I thank you for your attention and consideration of our opinion to these matters. That concludes our testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cruz. Do any of the co-sponsors have any questions or comments, or any of the panel members have any questions or comments?
Thank you very much for all your testimonies. We'll definitely take those into consideration and see how we can move this forward. I just have a question, sir, for Mr. San Augustine. Mr. San Augustine, on your 2018 budget request, what is the amount for the veterans, the operations of the Veterans Cemetery? No, just the
Just for the Veterans Cemetery itself is 422.
422.
Yes.
What is that?
That's
for?
the 240 of that is for a supervisor and 5 cemetery workers. 168,000 projected out of that is for supplies and material.
Okay. So in our discussion when we were developing this bill and we're working together, we were looking at the possibility, and that's where when you get together with the commission, you would develop this SOP, and from there be able to develop an RFP if it is desired at that point. And the whole intent here was that looking at your existing, on what you have now, the 400,000+ that you say set aside for the cemetery, and looking at whether outsourcing would give you, would accommodate what you need to take care of the cemetery and perhaps even improve it within that amount, so that perhaps a reprogramming of that 400,000 can be used in other areas of the Veterans Affairs Office. So I just want to place that on record, and if you can also maybe confirm that that's something that will be looked at as we move forward with this effort.
Well, Mr. Chair, I have 3 vendors that are requested to come in and just give me an idea how much the cost would be, breaking it down with regards to bush cutting, mowing, painting, water blasting, custodial maintenance for the restrooms and whatnot. So it looks very promising that the government is able to more likely utilize those type of outsourcing by virtue of the one submission that I received. It looks very promising. But again, you know, we need to continue to evaluate at what more effective way can we utilize the personnel and the services to be able to sustain and ensure continuity and immaculate service are continue to be provided at our cemetery. I want to bring this up. We do a very bad job when it comes to hiring companies to provide us construction services or other services in the government. We tend to go with the cheapest, right? And we end up with that quality of work, the cheap work. It's not good practice. And this is what happens when we have a cemetery that's designed for the final and eternal resting place of veterans and their family members that are qualified to be buried there. When we outsource the services in a cheap fashion, we get cheap results. And those are some of the things that I continue to look after, the after effect, where now projects that were done are surfacing because it was poorly executed or poorly designed. And there's several areas that is happening down at the cemetery. So in saying this, when we go out and start outsourcing, but again, let's not just take the cheapest, but what is it that this particular vendor is able to really do for this agency? It's the quality of work. Thank you.
I have a few questions. For Tom, that was in 1985, when they created the task force. And since 1985, you're right, nothing's happened. We did a quick check on that one, and coincidentally, my father was a senator at the time when it was passed. And I would be asking that question, whatever happened to it, but then that would fall under the Veterans Affairs Office to help out the legislature, I guess, in putting that task force together. But we will look into that, Tom. I just want to make sure that I address that to you. And for Mr. Bill, you identified a possible funding source, because I wanted to make sure that, you know, the people of Guam that are listening, the veterans do contribute. You remember I went to one of your meetings and looking over that data, there's a lot of money that the veterans of Guam have contributed to Guam, and I don't think they've gotten their fair share, like you mentioned, and we talked about that before. But you identified a possible funding, additional funding source. What was that again? I missed that on that.
To look at the street light fund or other funds and tag on an additional $5 for the Veterans Fund, you look at different sources and tag on $2 there, $1 there, whatever it may be, and that would definitely come up with a significant amount per year.
Okay, so basically what you're recommending is that we identify another source of funding,
yes,
because Mr. Cruz brought up, maybe with the shortfall in the government, we identified a different source of funding that would pay for either contracting it out or maybe even consider a public-private partnership, maybe in line. Would anybody disagree to that? Other than outright contracting, a public-private partnership where the employees that are there keep their job, but there's a private contractor that gets involved, so that we can avoid exactly what you said, Mrs. Snoxy, the reference to the way the government's been doing business procurement. I mean, because they get the cheapest, and if it's a private contractor, they'll get the best or what's they may consider adequate. But then you folks will be deciding that, if that's adequate, and would it meet the needs of the veterans, and to honor our veterans. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that's mentioned. And then with Mr. Cruz, I like the questions you posed on page 2 of your letter. I'd be really curious to know what is the shortcomings and the shortfalls of the agencies. And that's something that, Mrs. Snoggson, you can elaborate later, not today, because there's 5 questions, and they wouldn't be fair to you. I would like to get that report. Maybe I can provide you a copy of his testimony of the questions he's asked, because as I'm reading all the testimony that everybody presented, I want to make sure that everybody understands what's going on with the veterans. There is a big shortfall. I know Tom will probably ask me what happened to the license plate. Dan's going to ask me probably what's going on with the driver's license. I can tell you about it, but I'll do it after, because it's not part of this bill. Because I did look into that at revenue and tax. And I see the light at the end of the tunnel. I just like to bring that light a little bit closer. It's too far down. The veterans have been ignored. And that can't be tolerated. Okay, I'm looking at the other questions. Mr. Dan Mendiola, so I just jump on everybody that's spoken. Mr. Dan, we've spoken before, and I think even with Mr. Snoggson and with the panel that's here today. I brought this up to you folks before. Is it possible that you gentlemen, you veterans, can somehow get together and come up with a proposed staffing pattern or a creation of a Department of Veterans Affairs, so we don't have to always be looking at the governor to appoint a special assistant, but we will have somebody appointed and then approved by the legislature to manage the Veterans Affairs Office, and that hopefully you identify the resources you need. And yes, the Gov Guam budget is tight, but with the contribution that the veterans of Guam have contributed to this island, we can't ignore that. And if the people of Guam are going to say, and everybody else is going to say, that we don't have money, we need to find it, because the money's there. The veterans put it into our pockets or into the budget. We should be able to reach in there and take a look at the other agencies and say, maybe you need to reduce a little bit, because we need to get to the Veterans Affairs. Because, and that is very true. I would bet every family on Guam has a veteran in that household. And I like to make sure that the Veterans Affairs Office is created, staffed properly. I mean, I've seen the office in Aspen. I don't know how they work out of there. It's amazing. But it's got to change, and it's got to change real soon. Not like tomorrow, but real soon. All right? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gentlemen, I want to thank you all so much for your service, but also for your continued service as leaders of veteran organizations, and for making the time to come out here today. I also want to thank Senator Rodriguez for introducing this bill and for giving us an opportunity to have this discussion. It's a really important issue that we want to make sure that we're addressing. Mr. Cruz brought up a lot of different issues in his testimony, and I think it really drills down to the heart of the matter here. So I had a few questions that I wanted to ask Mr. San Agustin. So again, thank you for joining us. Mr. San Agustin, how long have you been in your position at the Guam Veterans Affairs Office?
I've been there since July 2016.
July of 2016.
That's correct.
Do you recall the OPA performance audit that Mr. Cruz was mentioning on the GVAO that was completed in September of last year?
That's correct, I do.
You received that report and you reviewed it extensively.
Yes.
It was also submitted to the Legislature and the Department of Administration, which provided a response to OPA while agreeing with the recommendations. Are you aware that the laws that created the OPA requires agencies like the Guam Veterans Affairs Office to prepare a corrective plan to implement the audit recommendations and to document its progress?
That's correct.
So you're aware that the laws that created the OPA require that the recommendations that they give for audits, that you create a plan to comply with those recommendations. So in implementing the recommendations and to endeavor to have the implementation completed no later than the beginning of the next fiscal year. You're aware?
Okay, yes.
So can you confirm that you are the lead in providing the corrective plan and implementing the audit recommendations?
Well, Senator, it is my pleasure to share with you that the OPA just informed me yesterday that they're coming around for another sweep, another inspection. I'm thinking it's going to take place this month. I was just informed yesterday that they are coming around. Yes, I am the one responsible to ensure to put together a plan to take corrective action on many of those that has been identified since 2011 OPA audit on to 2015. I have making a lot of corrective actions, but if you're inquiring that must I report those corrective action to this body? Is that what I'm alluding here?
So my question, thank you for just confirming that you are the lead in providing the corrective action plan. But I would like to be able, for this body and for maybe the committee that oversees Veterans Affairs, to have that plan, to be able to review it. So we would like to see the plan. We'd like to see an update on those steps.
Very good.
And it's been 8 months since the audit was released. So that was released in September of 2016. I understand that you were only in your position for a few months, but you've had 8 months since then to address some of these issues. So I guess my question to you is, if we can see your plan, and will these steps be addressed? Will it be completed before the end of the fiscal year as directed in law and before any other appropriations are approved for your direction?
I think it's safe to say that it's very possible. I want to make sure that I include the Adjutant General on here, General Leon Guerrero, because he's pretty much overseeing a lot of this. So I would engage him myself to let him know of the mandate that's being requested by this legislative body. But in response, I am compelled to move forward and be able to provide you all those reports.
So based on the OPA's audit, what would you say is the most challenging aspect that she asked for you to take a look at and to make changes to? Which of the recommendations?
Well, the biggest neglect that was identified on that report is the neglect of the usage of the non-appropriated funding, and then the equipment inventory of assets, which we do have. And then, Senator, a lot of that electronic stuff that we want to place on our webpage. I am honored to let you know that I am the only webpage master out of 11 employees down there. The director is the webpage master. I am the one trained. And at my age, even though I came from that era in the military, at my age I tend to forget, because of new programs, but we are implementing it. It's in motion, and I thank you for that. My citizen-centric report, I would like to submit for approval via the Adelaide before I post that on there. I am the webmaster. I will start populating that webpage as mandated by the OPA and the legislative body.
Thank you. So in response to, I just wanted to read this section from the OPA audit report, and you were saying that the most challenging thing is the NAF, right? The non-appropriated funds accounts. So the recommendation from the OPA was to relinquish the NAF bank accounts and record keeping from the GVAO to DMA or DOA, And then DMA or DOA may then facilitate a review of receipts, review of disbursements prior to check disbursements, including petty cash replenishment, and preparation of bank reconciliation. So can you confirm that that's happening?
Yes, and there is a process already in place. And so the way it works, and there's an SOP for that too, internal. So I just mentioned to the group this morning, because I had a 7:15 meeting, is that many of the SOPs and many of the things that we are going through right now is kind of a pilot program per se. And I say this because we talk about the non-appropriated funds, for example, because of the past neglect, right?
Right.
Now I endure hardship in really wanting to use that respective funding for immediate use. There's a reason why the program was implemented in the first place, so that the director and the commission can on the spot be able to utilize that fund to purchase material and equipment. And I'll give you an example. Because we wanted to make the process more efficient, more transparent, and that nothing unusual or not so ethical happens in between the process. The process is I will be given what is needed. I will go to 3 places, get an estimate, regardless of the cost. I will bring that estimate back. I will then have the secretary put in a request for funding and the cost and where this equipment or material is going to be purchased from. I will sign it. The chairperson of the commission will review it, question me as to why we need it. He will signature it. We send it up to the adjutant general. His secretary will review it, generate the check and the document. The general takes it, reviews it, calls me, questions me on it. If need to, he signs it. Then, when there's a check cut, myself and the chair will go back up there and sign for the check. Either he or myself will take that check, purchase the material or equipment, provide that document back to my office that will then indicate that that check was used for this on this date, the amount. That same document copy is provided to the adjutant general secretary for record keeping and so on and so on.
Wow.
And that's a really good process, and it's working. And just to let you know, DOA did an inspection a month ago to ensure that's what's happening. The not so good of that process is when the general is off island on a conference, or when Danny takes off to Hawaii for whatever reason off island, and now I got a mower that breaks down. Okay, or any equipment that I need urgently that I'm not able to acquire because now I don't have the number 2 guy. But there's an answer to that. It's called having enough supply ahead of time so that you don't have to be doing this last minute stuff. But sometimes that doesn't really happen. You know, you got a brand new mower and it broke, and you know you need to go get that piece of part, because you don't store those things in your shop.
Right.
Okay? But yes, that is the process, and there's a lot of other process that are in place. And as I mentioned, it's a pilot program. If you ask me, I would prefer to take that responsibility away from DMA or away from the general and say, Danny, Mr. Chair, this is the reason, here's the broken part, sign it, I go purchase it, and then I could give the receipt to the general for review and questioning or whatnot.
Well,
and those kind of
hopefully-
things, if you all want that, I mean, we could provide that as well to you all, but again,
Well, hopefully
Senator-
the process is working, and that the OPA will find that in her next audit that they might be able to streamline that process and just have you work together with Mr. Mendiola.
but it's good for now because we want to make sure there's accountability.
I agree.
That's why that's
Yes,
being done.
Mr. Mendiola.
Senator, I know what everybody's talking about here, about the OPA report and how grossly mismanaged the funding has been at the Guam Veterans Office. And it would be probably ugly to say that it starts from the top all the way to the bottom, or from the bottom all the way to the top. It tells a story. The OPA found out that there's been gross mismanagement of funding, no receipts, and everything is just flip-flop and flybys. We have changed the signature authority to double signature, as it was changed earlier, to facilitate one person to be able to write checks whenever he wants to, and so on and so forth. So that led to a lot of confused situation within the financial management of the Veterans Affairs Office. The law, Chapter 67, has been changed and amended. I am saying personally that if that chapter had been left alone the way it was written by law and adhered to, we won't have this problem. There's no need to write SOPs or whatever. Just follow the law, because it says there, the double check system has always been there between the Commission and the Veterans Affairs Office. The fine word and statement from the OPA officer, Ms. Doris Brooks, and that is, are you ready to take on and reconstruct your financial infrastructure, because that is what's missing in the VAO office. Mr. San Augustine, since he is aware of that statement, has undergone, and exactly what he had been explaining now, it's a double check system all the way around. When an item needs to be purchased, I am notified. When a check has to be approved or a request has to be approved for disbursement, it's a double signature authority. The report that you're referring to is upcoming. And I think the reports, again, as far as Chapter 67 is concerned, there was no need to overemphasize the report that's required to the OPA. It has always been mandated in Chapter 67 under the Commission and the Veterans Affairs Office guideline. We're supposed to be reporting to to OPA semi-annually. And also, we're supposed to be submitting some type of an up-to-date report to the governor, because the governor is our boss. So just to cut it short, yes, we are now on a straightforward move to revitalize and make good the financial infrastructure of the Veterans Affairs Office, and it's being done. His report will reflect that. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mr. Mendiola. I also just wanted to touch on what Mr. Devlin had mentioned about the governor's task force. We did some quick research and we pulled up the actual bill. So it was in the 18th Guam Legislature in 1985, as Senator San Augustine had mentioned. So it's my understanding from just taking a quick look at this report, basically it falls upon Governor Calvo to appoint the members of the Veterans Cemetery Task Force. So we're working with the Guam Compiler of Laws. We'll request from her why Public Law 18-19 is missing in the GCA. So we'll work with her on that. And then I can also just send a letter to the governor requesting that he impanel the Veterans Cemetery Task Force. So we can, that's definitely something that we can do. And, you know, I can work with my colleagues to figure out who best to sit on it and just ways that we can move forward. But I want to thank you again for taking the time out to discuss these matters with us. Again, thank you to Senator Rodriguez and Senator San Augustine and Senator Uggan for co-sponsoring this legislation and giving us this opportunity to have this discussion, because I think life gets in the way sometimes, and we really, unfortunately, some of us don't go down to the cemetery every day. I have family members that are buried there. I made a visit several weeks ago to the Veterans Cemetery, and my heart was broken with what I saw. I went to visit my Uncle Kin. He passed away in 1985. He's a Navy veteran, and I spoke with some of the cemetery staff. Unfortunately, Mr. San Augustine, I think you might have been off island on the day that I visited, but I spoke with some of the cemetery staff because I had recalled that his headstone was by one of the we usually count 2 trees in, then we walk a little bit in, and I wasn't able to find him. But I think some of the trees had been uprooted and moved around, so our landmark was gone. And so they were able to give us another kind of location, and we walked around that area. It took quite a bit of time, and it was really hot that day, and I still wasn't able to find his headstone. And it's because it was overgrown with grass. So we started pulling away at the grass. This is in the middle of the day. I took time out of my lunch to pay a visit to him. And it took me such a long time because we went down these rows where they said that the 1985 veterans were buried. And finally, I was able to find his name. So we pulled back all the grass. I mean, I have photos and I can send those to you. But it was really heartbreaking that that's the situation that we find ourselves. I was fortunate enough to live and work in Washington, D.C. for several years. As you know, my husband is a veteran in the Marine Corps, so we went to visit the Marine Corps Monument many times. And that Veterans Cemetery is immaculate. It is beautiful. People they have Sunday picnics on the lawn there because it's just so pristine. And that's what I'm envisioning for our cemetery too. And I know we have a lot of challenges that are in our way, lots of funding challenges and staffing and other things, equipment needs. But I know that if we continue to work together in the way that Mr. Mendiola mentioned and that I know that you're committed to doing, that we can really make a change. And so I'm not sure if the change is within this bill or in other things, but again, I just want to thank you for lending your voices to this process and making sure that we do what's right for our veterans and for our families. So thank you so much. Masi.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, can I respond, sir? Is that okay? Or, Senator, thank you. And that's one of the reasons why I want to caution on the outsourcing and not ensuring that we have permanent personnel in place. The reason this is very important, I thank you for bringing that up. I think it was about a year or 2 years ago where they actually paid a vendor to realign those headstones and lift them up to the ground so that they're all level. I think it was $320,000 that a vendor was paid for that. It's in the audit. That's the outcome. I'll do that for free, which is what I'm trying to do right now, and I thank you for that. I need to maintain sufficient number of permanent personnel who knows that ground very well. In saying that, I am also in the process to create the cemetery directory. And we don't need to spend much money on this. It's called an Excel spreadsheet. The only resource I need is really that body that was never provided. Or I'm sorry, not body, the individual that was never brought on board to perform those tasks. Now, the reason why it has to be people that knows that ground very well, because when the vendor was hired to realign the headstone to meet standards of the National Cemetery, they found out that the permanent employee that used to be there and is still there found out that they were moving the headstone 4 clips away from where the actual body is at just to realign. So because of past neglect job that was done, that's the end result. So we cannot dig every grave to move him just to realign. So the National Cemetery Association came back and said, leave it as is, just as long as it's able to align one way. So I am in pursuit to ensure that the alignment remains as is because that's where the body is at, but I am also in pursuit to get those headstones off the ground as they continue to sink into the ground so that we ensure that it is organized, it's lookable. You can look at it and say, yep, there it's at, and not worry about the overgrown weeds that continuously to happen down there. That is in motion. And like I said, I'll do it for free, and that's what I'm there for. I just want to share that, and thank you very much.
I'm sitting here and I'm looking at four individuals in front of me that look sort of shocked. Don't be so shocked. Jose is right. 10 years ago, I went down to that cemetery with another administrator, and with Art Mesa, and with the cemetery inspector from Washington, D.C. We probed the cemetery. There are certain areas where you would say there's a body, there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing there. There are certain areas where you think there's a body, there may not be. Where you think there isn't a body, there is a body. We probed it. We went down with rods, and we kept going down with the rod, and all of a sudden there's somebody's name, and keep going down, nothing. Then all of a sudden when you say, well, there's nobody there, but it looks like something is wrong, you go down and you hit it. Boom, boom. The diagram that Parks and Recs had was not accurate. You go to most cemeteries, national cemeteries, a lot of your state cemeteries, everything is sort of in a line, as best I can. Here, the line goes this way, the line goes that way, the line goes around the tree. The cemetery inspector was just furious with the administrator at that time. And it was so bad that he wouldn't even talk to the administrator. He told the administrator, well, I'll talk to Art Mesa and Tom Devlin. They're veterans. They seem to know what's going on. You don't seem to even know where the bodies are. But it wasn't that administrator's, issue. That happened a long, long time ago. It was from Parks and Recs, how things were drawn up, if things were accurate. Now, we talked to individual senators at the time. So when the current batch of senators look sort of surprised, don't be surprised. There are a lot of things that the veterans at this table have discussed for years and years and years. And what I'm trying to tell the 15 senators today is that the veterans community is not going to take it anymore. Being surprised is not going to cut it anymore, because many senators, past and present, have been notified privately that certain things have gone down. When was the last time we had an oversight hearing? Not a complaint, but to find out the facts. So everybody knows what's going on. The general public knows what's going on, so they see it on TV. We have a tendency to blame the administrator. The administrator. Well, the administrator is detailed from the governor's office. Jose, 2 weeks from now, could be detailed somewhere else for whatever reason. The legislature has got to get on the ball somewhere along the line and say, we don't want temporary people. We want a permanent position. That was a merit position. As far as I know, it's still a merit position. There's a debate on the salary. The salary is too low, so you can't get somebody. The administrator has got to be taken out of the political process. The administrator that administers a veteran cemetery has got to go to the governor and say, Governor, this is wrong. This cannot continue. Why? Because I'm a veteran, and I have to represent the veterans because the veterans are buried there, whether they're Republican or Democrat. And that's not happening. I've said this I don't know how many times. The governor, this governor, the past, they're doing an end run. They're going around it. Whether they're doing it deliberately or not, this is what we have. We have temporary people as administrators. And then when other inspectors come down, that poor person is hit sideways because there's no consistency. You don't have somebody in there 15 or 20 years that knows what's been going on for 15, 20 years. The history. Jose doesn't know that Art Mesa and Tom Devlin went down to that cemetery and probed that cemetery. He wasn't on the island at that time. He was in the Camacho administration. But I was there. Art Mesa's off island. He's in Arizona. But I'm still here. I have a lot of history that I've talked to various senators. Some are still senators, some are not. But you've got to get together and figure this out once and for all, because I don't think the veterans community is going to stand for any of this, I call it nonsense, anymore. Saying you don't have the money? Well, then you're going to have to figure out something. I can't tell you how to get the money. That's not my job. Sadly enough, It's 15 jobs. It's your job. And then it's the governor to say yay or nay, and then you can go back and forth and fight over it. Senators, you wanted the job. You ran for the job. Now, sadly enough, you're stuck with what's happened over the years. This group is stuck with it. And you're going to have to figure out a way. The veterans community has talked and talked and talked about what's going on. They have a tendency to focus on the administrator, whoever that is, and the administrator takes the hit. Well, the administrator took the hit on the OPA report, but they had an OPA report in the Camacho administration that was just as bad. And very little was done. Very little was done by the legislature at that time. You talk about a budget. They doubled the budget from $300,000 to $600,000. But I've said all these years, you probably need a budget of $1 million. Now, is Jose going to go up to the government and say, we need a budget of $1 million? And they're going to say, no, it won't fly. We don't have the money. You remember about the water bill? The governor transferred money from the disabled to pay for a water bill. He transferred money from MIS at Ireland to pay for a water bill. Water that was going into the cemetery grounds that no one ever used. And the meeting was going and going and going. And the veterans at this table testified something is wrong. Shut the water off. Do something. And the meter just kept going. And the people of Guam probably spent over $100,000, probably more like $125,000 for water going nowhere. What do you tell the people on Guam that have to pay taxes? And all of a sudden they find out that, number one, the water was never used. It was running into the ground. And number two, the governor, because he has no other choice, has to take money for different agencies. Our roads don't get done because the governor takes $90,000 from Public Works. Then he takes $25,000, $30,000 from the disabled. The gentlemen at this table all know that. They know what's going on. Their families are tired of that. When this came up at the Military Purple Heart meeting, the words that I'm using were nice. They were nice. And every one of the 15 senators took a hit. All four of you that are in front of me took a hit. Whether you like it or not, whether you think it's fair or not, you all took the hit. And these are Republicans and Democrats. They don't care. Because they're saying it's been going on for years and years. We get the same old from everybody. They have us come down there, testify, and nothing gets done. Or they'll give us another $25,000, and they'll say they do this and do that. They're tired of it. A year and a half is a short time. Remember what happened 4 months ago? Almost half the legislature is gone. Senators, it can happen again. It's not what I'm saying. It's what the veterans community members are telling me. It's not a threat. But it's happened once. It can happen again. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, just real quick, I just want to say one last thing. I need to be excused for a medical appointment, but this is me speaking out, and as a young veteran leader who sat alongside with these gentlemen for the last 10 years and formed an organization here at Guam for the voice of the younger generation, so that we have an input to what we say as well. And we may not always agree or disagree to what the outcome may be, but we should always be on the same page, and in the end, it's always for the veteran, for the right purpose, for the right thing. In the past, I had cried many times in emails to certain individuals, senators, congressmen, and in one particular I'll refer back to is the previous audit report that was done, and this sadly had to fall on Mr. San Augustine's lap. But I had cried back then in a plea of an urgency that the body shall or should convene on an investigative hearing or an oversight hearing, because the evidence that was done by the audit provides such justification Senators, we wouldn't be here today, at least I think we wouldn't be here today, talking about the cemetery, about these issues, or hearing from the Honorable Senator about visiting her uncle. When the contract was given then, in the $3.3 million federal grant, in that contract, it was written out, black and white, what was to be done at that cemetery. The alignment of the headstones, that's in the contract. Did it get done? No. The crypts, were they properly built to the speculation of how our environment is? No. Today, you witnessed that. There's cracks. And so, I would like to hope that even then, in legal advice, is this something worth looking back into and calling those individuals to testify based on the facts, based on what the contract says? Because if this is me and I was the government, I would tell that contractor who we paid, who got the money and ran, to come back and fix it or give back the money to the people of Guam. Because one, you didn't do me wrong. You did those veterans injustice at that cemetery. Not me. I'm not buried there yet. But part of the contract, you look into it, in its own terms, states it. Look into the contract, because you would know, even the previous administrator admitted that, to the fact that the crypts was signed off by not a certified engineer, but a cemetery worker. So let the facts speak for itself. I can only advocate what's brought forward to our organization, to myself. I can only advocate further for Mr. St. Augustine to support his operation. But it's also my responsibility to question. But with that, Senators, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, Senator Lee, Senator St. Augustine, I hope we take those things into consideration, because it was at my request of our organization who reached out to Senator Jeff Flake from Arizona, Republican, to initiate with the Secretary of Veteran Affairs allegations into mismanagement of the grant operation and grant procedures, and that an active, ongoing OIG investigation is still in place. So by going directly outsource, are we saying that, knowing the facts, we're just going to wash our hands and turn the other way? But we should hold everybody accountable, or at least those accountable, if not the contractor accountable, because those terms were not met. And we've seen this too far many times in our government in regards to our contracts outsourced. Senator St. Augustine, I want to appreciate the advice, the option given as a public partnership. It is sad that we might lose employees if we went directly outsourced. And speaking to a lot of these staff members at the cemetery, it's kind of saddening. It is also that in our recommendation that at least a task force, if there is one, or at least a committee, should try to do some kind of exiting survey to these employees. Last year we were here testifying in a public hearing for GG1 to be hired, put on the payroll. The same issue in regards to the cemetery staffers. We went from such number to down to 2 workers. We have to give the opportunity of what we call rights, labor rights, the opportunity to employees to say or give a survey at least as to what can be better, what can changes, or why they chose to laugh. I am saddened because one of those members is a member of our organization, a Gulf War veteran, who buried his son at that cemetery and ran the operations as the manager of the cemetery. Have we reached out to those individuals and heard their story? Again, I'm not here for myself, but I speak for our organization and for the veterans who've asked me to bring these questions up to this body. And that, I leave it as that, Senators, Mr. Speaker. I apologize, but I have to leave for a doctor's appointment.
Before you leave, I want to thank all of you for your service. Thank all of you for your service and for coming down and testifying today. And we'll discuss this amongst ourselves afterwards. But thank you very much for your testimony. The committee will continue to accept any written testimony on this matter for the next 10 days. Provide written testimonies to the Office of Speaker Benjamin J.F. Cruz, Guam Congress Building, 163 Challenge Center Papa, Hagåtña, Guam 96910. They may also be sent via email to senator@senatorbjcruz.com. And we stand in recess until 2 o'clock this afternoon for a continued hearing. Thank you very much.